want to see how destructive it is? You want to see how destructive political correctness is? I'm sure you heard about this, but it is amazing. One of the people in the terrorist attack in London Bridge, was in a documentary. About called The Jihadis Next Door. So I asked the guys here, Austin and Bailey, to cut out a piece of this from YouTube, and I sent them a YouTube clip just so I could show you a little piece of this documentary with the terrorist in it. And by the time I sent it to them, it had disappeared off YouTube. Isn't that right? Yeah. It was gone from YouTube. They're cutting it down. They took it off Netflix. And Netflix, they were playing some, what was it they were playing? A Batman movie or something. They cut out the word terrorists. This instantaneous appeasement. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But first, just take a look. Here is, they're talking about this guy Muhammad, who is an activist, a radical Islamic activist in London, and the picture of this guy, Butthead, or whatever his name is. His name is literally Butt. I mean, his last name was Butt, you know, because at least he was aptly named. It was like Reality Winner was not aptly named. This guy was aptly named, this terrorist. His name is Butt. And he was one of the faces that you see in this scene.
Mohammed won't worship in the mosque today. Instead, he leads his group for a prayer session in Regent's Park.
Anyone got compass? Guys, determine the Qibla, please. Come on. Somebody determine the Qibla.
Anyone got a smartphone?
Oh, sort out the Qibla, bro. He's just going to find out the direction for prayer. This way, lads. Come here a bit, come here.
The group display the black flag of Islam, a symbol associated with Islamic armies for the past 1,200 years, but one that's regularly adopted by extremists, including ISIS. I can't help but think that he's being actively provocative.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. The real life is the life of the Akhirah, not this life. This is not the real life, my dear brothers. This is a passing time for us. So this is a type of jihad for you, that you came out to do da'wah, enjoining good and forbidding evil. And don't be deterred. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
And you can see there are close-ups of the face of this guy Butt, who's like later on killing people. So my question is this. In England, I know they have laws now about supporting ISIS, but in England, if you go out and say Islam is a hateful religion, I hate Islam, you can get arrested. They'll come to your house. If you tweet that, the police will show up at your house. Why can't they show up at this guy's house? I mean, if they can arrest you, we have the First Amendment, so that protects a lot of hateful things as well as a lot of great things. But they don't have a First Amendment. They have anti-hate speech laws, so why isn't this hate speech? Why isn't an Islamist calling for the death of England as much a hate speech as when you criticize Islam? You know, Theodore Dalrymple, just an excellent writer. He writes for City Journal a lot. He's in the Wall Street Journal today. He was a psychiatrist in prison. And it was where, so he's not a guy the left can't make fun of him as a guy who never reached out to anybody. But while he was in prison, he started to learn that criminals have a very interesting mindset. You know, they have this interesting mindset of like entitlement, and they don't know how to think beyond their own desires and all this stuff. And he's talking about, he wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal today called Terror and the Teddy Bear Society, referring to the teddy bears that people show up and they put on the spaces where people have been murdered by these Islamic terrorists. And he says, we have gone in for what a Dutch friend of mine calls creative appeasement. Authorities make concessions even before one suspects there have been any demands for them. Thus, a public library in Birmingham, one of the largest known to me, has installed women-only tables, a euphemism for Muslim women only. Whether there was ever a request or demand for sex-segregated seating from Muslims is probably undiscoverable. Truth seldom emerges from a public authority, but the justification would almost certainly be that without such tables, Muslim women would not be able to use the library at all. The Birmingham airport has set aside a room for wudu, the Muslim ablutions before prayer. No other religion is catered for in this fashion, so the impression is inevitably given that Islam is in some way favored or privileged. Again, it would be difficult to find out whether they received requests or demands for such a room or merely anticipated them. In either case, weakness is advertised, and that is true. They are caving in even, you know, sometimes I think Islam would most decent Islamic people would understand if they were treated no differently than the rest. But when I was traveling to Afghanistan years ago, I was in London. I was in a London airport. I was in Heathrow, I believe it was. And I went into the chapel to pray, and there was a Muslim guy there praying at the top of his lungs in this guttural Arabic so that nobody could think, nobody could do anything. He was just monopolizing the space, and that kind of thing does not have to be appeased. It does not have to be recognized, and neither does their treatment of women, which is obscene.